Hello everyone, this is Mr. Millen, and I'm here with a bit of an instructional video, a review video on the properties of quadrilaterals. Now this flow chart, I am allowing you to use it on the quiz on the properties of quadrilaterals. There is a completed one as well as a detailed explanation video posted along with it in one of the previous videos and materials on the Google Classroom page. Okay, so you would use this formula anytime that you have properties that you're unsure of, or you need to make sure that you are using the correct thing for the correct situation. Now, the first 15 questions or so rely heavily on this flow chart. Okay, so the best thing to do is to look through each of these problems and make sure you understand how exactly you need to get those done. Okay, so like for example, number one, what properties does a given figure have? You can tell that's a square, and so you would look through each single one and say, hey, you know, this is a square, has 4 congruent sides, each angle is a right angle, diagonals are congruent, perpendicular, bisect each other and bisect opposite angles, and then of course the 2 parallel sides and 2 congruent sides and all that stuff. Okay, the few unique ones here that we are going to look at, number 2, number 2, it says the opposite sides of a walkway are congruent as shown in the figure below. Which additional piece of information would prove that the walkway is a rectangle? And so to prove this is a rectangle definitively, you need to be able to prove one of the 2 unique things to rectangles. And the first unique thing that a rectangle has is that it has 4 right angles. So B, C, D, and A would all be 90 degrees. The other thing is that the diagonals are congruent. Okay, so any box shape like this, you know, like you would see a box if you were to mail something or get something in the mail in a cardboard box, will have congruent diagonals. Okay, so if any of these options say congruent diagonals, or it says that these sides are perpendicular in some way, then you know it's a rectangle. So if we look at A, angle B is congruent to angle D. All this is saying is that the opposite angles are congruent. Now, if the opposite angles are congruent, that is true for a rectangle because they're all 90 degrees. But if I said that angle B was 65 degrees and angle D was 65 degrees, that would be true, but this would not be a rectangle. It would be a parallelogram instead. So A cannot be used. B, if you have line segment BD is perpendicular, that symbol there means perpendicular to AC. What this is saying is that BD, which is the diagonal, is perpendicular to the other diagonal. Now, rectangles do not have perpendicular diagonals unless they're squares, okay? So this would not be true for every single rectangle. So that's why we cannot use that, okay? C says BD is congruent to AC, and so this is saying the diagonals are congruent, and since the diagonals in a rectangle are congruent, and it's the only shape other than an isosceles trapezoid and a square that has congruent diagonals, this would prove it's a rectangle. Now you might be saying, well, the square has the congruent diagonals and everything else, but a square would always be a rectangle. And then of course, D says B plus C is 180. All that's saying is consecutive angles sum up to 180 degrees, which while true for a rectangle, I could say that B was 65 and C was 115. Make that true and it would no longer be a rectangle. Number 3, it says for the figure below, select all correct names. You're just going to pick what the first name is, and then you're going to pick all the other things that can be classified as. You can use your flow chart to help you out with that. Number 4, if a garden planner has 4 sides and all you can conclude is that all 4 angles are right angles, what type of quadrilateral is the garden planner? Notice here that it says all you can conclude is that all 4 angles are right angles. Okay? It says nothing about the sides. So there are only 2 shapes that are required to have right angles, and that is a rectangle and a square. But it says nothing about the sides being congruent to one another. It doesn't say all 4 sides are congruent, so it cannot be a square because that also must be true for that. So it would have to be B, a rectangle. Number 5. So number 5, if a room has 4 sides and all you can determine is that opposite sides are parallel and both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, what type of quadrilateral is the room? Well, it says opposite sides are parallel, so it cannot be a trapezoid. If you'll notice here, the only thing it mentions about the sides is that the opposite ones are parallel. It doesn't mention anything about the sides being congruent or anything like that. So a rhombus requires all 4 sides to be congruent, so we're not sure whether this could be a rhombus or not. So let's look at the next one, rectangle. Again, it doesn't say anything about the angles other than the opposite angles are congruent. It would have to mention that all 4 angles are right angles and nothing else. With regards to the sides being congruent, to be a rectangle. And then, so that leaves D, which is a parallelogram, and a parallelogram is 2 pairs of opposite sides where both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. All right. Now that does it for most of the tricky ones. Most of these others are, again, just properties, and which would be considered parallelogram, which would not be, so on and so forth. Okay. Number 12, 13, and 14, they're just finding missing angles. So you're going to be using the properties of, congruent sides and congruent angles. So for instance, number 12, you have an isosceles trapezoid DEFG here. And so you know that the opposite sides, the opposite legs here have to be congruent for it to be an isosceles trapezoid. So DG has to be equal to FG. So that has to be 7 meters. You also know that the lower base angles are congruent to one another and the upper base angles are congruent to one another, which means that G is congruent to F and D is congruent to E. Well, since this is a trapezoid, you also know that D and G have to add up to 180 and E and F have to add up to 180. So to find D and E, you would take 180 minus 80, which gives you 100 degrees for both. Okay. Number 13, it says rhombus KMTR is shown in the figure below. Determine the value of each of the missing angles and sides. So since it says it's a rhombus, the key thing about a rhombus is that all 4 sides are congruent. Well, you know that MT is 25 inches. Since it's a rhombus, all the sides have to be congruent. They have to be the same length, which means that RT is 25 inches, KR is 25 inches, KM is also 25 inches, and of course, MT. The other thing is, you know, a rhombus is a parallelogram, so you know that opposite angles are congruent. So K and T are opposite angles. So K is congruent to T, so it's 133 as well. And then to find M and R, apologies for the lights. It's been a while since I have to worry about that. To find M and R, we know that consecutive angles in a parallelogram, rhombus, square, rectangle, are supplementary, which means they add up to 180. So when you want to find M and R here, you know that K and T are 133. So you take 180 minus 133, which gives you 47. And of course, M and R are opposite angles, so they should be congruent. Number 14, parallelogram QRST is shown in the figure below. Determine the value of each of the missing angles and sides. So the parallelogram here, the sides aren't all congruent to one another. However, opposite sides are congruent to one another. So RS is opposite QT, which means that QT is also 33 inches. And RQ is opposite ST, which means ST is 11 inches. Then you need to look for your angles. You know angle S. The opposite angle from angle S is Q. So angle S and Q must be the same. So Q is 58 degrees as well. Then to find R and T, R is consecutive with angle S and Q. So you take 180 minus 58, which gives you 122 for R. R is opposite T, so T would also be 122 degrees. Number 15, you just complete the statements using the words never, sometimes, or always. Use that flow chart to help you with the classifications, and make sure you check your answers with the PDF. All right. So now we're going to go on to the bulk of the video, which will be working out these math problems here, just to make sure we understand how to do these. So number 16, it says a rectangle is shown below. What is the measure of angle MLN? So when it says angle MLN, you need to make sure that you're aware of whether it's a part of an angle or the whole thing. So if you have MLN, you'll see that MLN is that angle there. It's not the whole thing, it's just that part. So we're looking for X. Now this says that it's a rectangle. And like we said before, the rectangle has the unique property that all four angles are right angles. So we know that angle M must be 90 degrees, and we know angle O is 90 degrees. Now if you look here, what this diagonal does, it separates these two, or this rectangle into two identical right triangles. Well, we know two of the angles already, and we want to find the third, and we know the sum of the angles in a triangle equals 180 degrees. So to find the measure of angle MLN, you can add those two angles that you have together and subtract from 180. So X would be 180 minus 90 degrees minus 23 degrees. And when you do that, you get X is equal to 67 degrees. So the measure of angle MLN is 67. Number 17. Number 17 says rhombus QRST is shown below. What is the measure of angle TRS? So we want to find angle TRS. So again, figure out if it's the whole thing or just a part. So angle TRS. So we're just looking for this part here. Now the important thing is that this says it's a rhombus. So you'll notice that SR is a diagonal. And if you remember, the diagonals in a rhombus bisect opposite angles. And remember that bisect means it splits them in half. So we know that X is 1/2 of this angle. So if we can find angle R, we can easily find angle X. So let's think about this. We've got angle Q and we want to find angle R. What type of angles are Q and R? Well, they are connected by one side of the quadrilateral. So angle Q and angle R are consecutive. And since they're consecutive, that means they add up to 180 degrees. So the measure of angle R is going to be equal to 180 minus 98, which is equal to 82 degrees. Now we're not done yet because we wanted to find this half of it. So the diagonals bisect the angles. We know the whole angle is 82, so we need to cut that in half. We need to cut R in half. So the measure of angle TRS is equal to 1/2 of 82, or 82 divided by 2, which is 41 degrees. So the measure of angle TRS is equal to 41 degrees. Number 18 is very similar to number 16. However, this time we have an X involved. So it wants us to determine the value of X given the rectangle shown below. So again, since this is a rectangle, you know that these corner angles are 90 degrees. And again, we have a diagonal here that splits this rectangle into two congruent right triangles. And we know that all three of these angles have to add up to 180 degrees. So if we do that, we take 7x plus 1 plus 68 plus 90 and set it equal to 180. Well, on the left side, we can combine like terms. We can combine the 1, 68, and 90. So that gives us 7x plus 159 is equal to 180. We need to get rid of the 159 by subtracting it from both sides. So we get 7x is equal to 21. Divide both sides by 7, and you get that x is equal to 3. There is another way you could have done that. There are a few different ways. You could have figured out what this whole angle was supposed to equal and then set that equal to it. So if you did that, you would take 180 minus 90 minus 68, which would give you 22. And then you would have 7x plus 1 equals 22. And again, you would end up with x equals 3. All right. Now, number 19, parallelogram WXYZ is shown where the measure of angle X is equal to 6x minus 6, and the measure of angle Z is equal to 3x plus 24. What is the measure of angle Y? So we want to find angle Y. Well, in order to find angle Y, we first need to find another angle. But in order to do that, we have to find what our X value is. So if we look here at angles X and Z, angles X and Z are opposite. So that means that angle X is congruent to angle Z. Well, angle X is 6x minus 6. And remember, congruent means that you set these equal to one another because they have the same measure. So 6x minus 6 is equal to 3x plus 24. And then we solve from there. So the first step, we're going to subtract 3x from both sides. So we get 3x minus 6 is equal to 24. We're going to add 6 to both sides. We get 3x equals 30. Divide both sides by 3, and you get that x is equal to 10. Now, in order to find W, we need to figure out these angles. Okay, that's the only way we can find W. Well, if we can plug it into either one because we know they're the same. So if we plug it in here, we get angle X is equal to 6 times 10 minus 6, which is 60 minus 6, which is 54. Now, I will tell you, don't pay any attention to how the angle looks. Again, figures not drawn to scale. So angle W here, angle W, how would we find it here knowing these two angles are 54? Well, W and X and W and Z are consecutive angles, which means that W and X are supplementary and W and Z are supplementary. So to find the measure of angle W, we take 180 and subtract 54, which gives us 126 degrees for angle W. All right, flipping on over to number 20. Number 20 is somewhat similar as the previous one. It says rhombus ABCD is shown where the measure of angle A is equal to 12x plus 32 and the measure of angle D is equal to 8x minus 12. What is the measure of angle C? So the measure of angle A and D here, and we want to find angle C. Well, again, we have to determine the value of X first. So A and D have X's labeled on them. So A and D are consecutive angles, which means they add up to equal 180 degrees. So we need to take their two values here, 12x plus 32 plus 8x minus 12, and set them equal to 180. On the left side, we can combine 12x and 8x, so that's 20x. We can combine 32 and negative 12, which is 20, equals 180. Then we can subtract 20 from both sides, so we get 20x is equal to 160. Divide both sides by 20, and we get that x is equal to 8. So how does that help us find the measure of angle C? Well, angle C is opposite from angle A. So since C is opposite A, that means that angle C is congruent to angle A. So if we determine what angle A is, we know what angle C is. So the measure of angle A is equal to 12 times x, which is 8, plus 32. So this is 96 plus 32, which is equal to 128 degrees. And since C is congruent to 128 degrees, or to angle C is congruent to angle A, then the measure of angle C must also be 128 degrees. Number 21. Number 21 says parallelogram DEFG is shown where EF equals 13x minus 4 and GX equals 8x plus 51. What value of x would prove this parallelogram is a rhombus? So if you look here, you want to prove that this is a rhombus. Well, the key character about a rhombus is that all four sides are congruent. So that means that every single one of these sides should be congruent, which means they should be equal in length. Well, that means that GF must be equal to EF. So we need to set those equal to one another. And then we can solve. Subtract 8x from both sides, and you get 51 is equal to 5x minus 4. Add 4 to both sides, and you get 55 is equal to 5x. Divide both sides by 5, and you get that x is equal to 11. And you can always plug that back in and see if those are equal. And if they are, then you have shown that they are, that it is a rhombus. All right, number 22, rhombus ABCD is shown below where the measure of angle BCD is equal to 112 degrees. What is the measure of angle DBC? So again, we're going to take D and go to B and then to C. And we can see that we are looking for that part. Now again, this is a rhombus, which means that this diagonal splits angle B into two congruent parts. So if we can determine angle B, we can determine what X is after that. So angle C and angle B are consecutive angles. So the measure of angle B plus the measure of angle C is 180, which means that the measure of angle B is 180 minus 112, which is 68 degrees. So angle B is 68 degrees. Since the diagonals bisect the opposite angles in a rhombus, that means that our missing angle DBC is equal to half of 68, which is 34 degrees. Number 23, given the figure below, what is the measure of angle A? Now you'll notice here that this figure, unlike the others, only has one pair of parallel sides. And the key thing there is that means this is a trapezoid. And a trapezoid, you have angle B and angle A here. That's an upper angle and a lower base angle. And that means that these two angles are supplementary since they're connected by the same leg. So the measure of angle B plus the measure of angle A is 180. So we take angle B, which is 7x plus 1, and add angle A, which is 2x minus 10, and set it equal to 180. And then we solve. 7x plus 2x is 9x. 1 minus 10 is negative 9, equal to 180. Add 9 to both sides, and we get 9x is equal to 189. Divide both sides by 9, and you get x is equal to 21. But we're not done yet because the problem asked us for the measure of angle A. Well, the measure of angle A is 2x minus 10. We found x to be 21, so we take 2 times 21 minus 10. So we get 2 times 21, which is 42, minus 10 gives us 32 degrees. So the measure of angle A is 32 degrees. All right, number 24. Number 24 says quadrilateral DEFG is given below. What measure of angle DEF ensures DEFG is a parallelogram? So the key thing here is we want to find angle DEF to make sure it's a parallelogram. So angle DEF, and DEF is this angle here. So it's angle E. Now I want you to notice something here. That angle D is made up of two parts, 85 degrees and 20 degrees. So that's the two parts of angle D. So if we want to find the whole measure of angle D, that means we take 85 plus 20, which gives us 105. Now, if we're talking about a parallelogram, you need to have opposite angles be congruent and consecutive angles to be supplementary. Well, angle E and angle D are consecutive because they are connected by one side of the quadrilateral. Since they're consecutive, angle E and D should be supplementary, which means that the measure of angle E should be 180 minus 105, which is 75 degrees. Number 25, in the given diagram, what is the measure of angle CDE of parallelogram CDEF? So if we look here, angle CDE, we're looking for this angle here. Now this one's a bit different than the other ones we've been doing. And if you look here, we have a little bit of a right triangle drawn out here. And basically what this is doing is forming a box, so to speak. Okay. Now, if you'll notice here, this is a right angle. Okay. Do you notice here at the bottom of this that this would also be a right angle? Okay. Because we're completing it as a rectangle. Well, since this is a right angle and this part is 27 degrees, this part would be 90 degrees minus 27 degrees, which is 63. So the measure of angle CFE is 63 degrees. Now, we can ignore this part now that we have this angle. We can see that angle D and angle F would be opposite angles. And opposite angles are congruent. And since they're congruent, that means X would be 63 degrees. Now you do have to be careful because sometimes what it'll ask you for this angle instead, one that's consecutive. So if it's consecutive, you would just take 180 minus 63 and get your answer for that one, okay? So just be careful with that. Sometimes they like to, trip you up with those types of questions. All right, number 26. It says quadrilateral QRST has the coordinates 0, 4, 4, 4, and 0, 0. If quadrilateral QRST is a square, what are the coordinates of vertex R? So what you want to do here is you want to plot your points. So we've got 0, 4, 4, 4, and 0, 0. So we have Q, S, and T. Okay, now this wanted it to be a square, okay? And since it's wanting to be a square, we know that we have to have all four sides being congruent. Well, the distance from this part to this part is 4. The distance here is 4. So from T to R, it should also be 4. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, which is here. And we see if that is a set of coordinates that we have. So that's coordinates 4, 0, which is answer choice B. Now, sometimes that will have it tilted, okay? So just be careful with that. If it does have it tilted, you can count up and over the same number of spaces because they should have the same slopes. All right, number 27. Number 27 is a tricky one. So parallelogram WXYZ is a rhombus where the measure of angle AXW is 24 degrees. What is the measure of angle ZYA? So if we do Z to Y to A, we're looking for this angle here. Now, this says it's a rhombus. There's a couple different things we can make use of since we have intersecting diagonals here. The first thing is that the diagonals of a rhombus are perpendicular. And remember that perpendicular means they form 4 90-degree angles at their intersection. So here at angle A would be a 90-degree angle. And all 4 of those would be 90 degrees. The second thing is that the diagonals bisect the opposite angles. And so since the diagonals bisect the opposite angles, we know that these two parts are congruent. So this is congruent. We know these two parts are congruent, these two parts are congruent, and these two parts are congruent. So if I can figure out this part, then I can know automatically what this part is. Well, do you notice that right here, with these diagonals intersected that way, we have 4 identical triangles, okay? Well, we know a 90-degree angle here, and we know a 24-degree angle here. So if I can figure out this angle, I can find this one because they're the same. So the sum of the angles in a triangle is 180. So we take 180 degrees and subtract 90 and 24. And when you do that, you get 66 degrees here. Since these angles are bisected, that means that those two must be the same. So those two angles are both 66 degrees. So the measure of angle ZYA is 66 degrees. Number 28, given parallelogram DEFG is shown where GF equals 2x plus 7 and DG equals 8x minus 23. What value of x would prove DEFG is a rhombus? Again, we have side lengths labeled here, and we're looking to prove it's a rhombus, so all 4 sides must be congruent. So if we can show these are congruent, the other ones will be as well, since it's already a parallelogram. So we set these equal to one another. So 8x minus 23 is equal to 2x plus 7. Subtract 2x from both sides, and you get 6x minus 23 is equal to 7. Add 23 to both sides, and you get 6x is equal to 30. Divide both sides by 6, and you get that x is equal to 5. Now you can plug that in, and if you look here, you get 2 times 5, which is 10, plus 7, which is 17. And then here you get 8 times 5, which is 40, minus 23 is also 17. So we know we did it correctly. Number 29, given the figure below, what is the measure of angle C? So again, this is a trapezoid. and we have an upper base angle here and a lower base angle. Well, in a trapezoid, the upper base and lower base angles are supplementary. So the measure of angle C plus the measure of angle D must equal 180. So we take 4x plus 13 plus 3x minus 1 and set it equal to 180. 4x plus 3x is 7x. 13 minus 1 is plus 12, and that's still equal to 180. We subtract 12 from both sides, and we get 7x is equal to 168. We divide both sides by 7, and we get x is equal to 24. But we're not done yet because we want to determine the measure of angle C. The measure of angle C is equal to 4x plus 13. So we plug in our x value that we found there. So we do 4 times 24 plus 13. 4 times 24 is 96. And if we take 96 and add 13, we get 109 degrees for the measure of angle C. So just make sure you pay attention to which angle that it wants you to find, because this question could have easily said, what is the measure of angle D instead? All right, number 30, rectangle QRST represents a park that has walking paths QS and RT that intersect at P. The length of PS is 315 feet, I apologize. And the length of RS is 195 feet. What is the length of RT, one of the walking paths? So you'll notice here that we're looking for RT, which is a diagonal. Now this says it's a rectangle, and there's two important properties there. One is that the diagonals bisect each other. Okay, so the diagonals bisect each other, which means that PS here, which is 315, is also the same as QP. So we know that QP is 315 as well because they are bisected. They have to be congruent. Okay, so these two are congruent. But the important thing that helps us find out more than that is that the diagonals of a rectangle are congruent, which means that they are the same length. So that means that in this case, RT is congruent to QS. Well, from our first bit where we said they bisect one another, we found that both parts were 315. So I can find QS now, and QS is equal to 315 plus 315, which is 630. Well, RT is congruent to QS, so that means that RT must also be equal to 630 feet. Number 31. Number 31 says quadrilateral ABCD has the coordinates A at 2, 4, B at 0, 2, and C at 2, 0. If quadrilateral ABCD is a square, what are the coordinates of vertex D? So you could look through each one of these and put them in there. Now you'll notice here that we have to go, when we do our square here, we have to go left 2, up 2, and then here we go up 2, right 2. So from here, you know that we would have to go right 2 and then down 2, which is D. And so that's 4, 2, which is option A. Okay. That's what I was talking about earlier when I said that sometimes it'll be tilted. You can count the spaces and just keep going around in a circle with that. So You know, the other way you can do it is you could plot each one of the points. So if you plotted 5, 2, you'd be able to see that that wouldn't make it a square. 4, 1 wouldn't either. And 3, 2, 3, 2 would be too close as well. Okay, so there are multiple ways you could do that one. Number 32, LMNO is a rhombus with the measure of angle LMN equal to 32 degrees. So LMN is 32 degrees right here. What is the measure of angle NOL? So N to the O to the L. We want to know what that angle is. Now this says it's a rhombus. So the only thing we have to go off is that we have an angle M, which is 32 degrees. Well, since this is a rhombus, angle M and O are opposite angles. Opposite angles are congruent, which means that NOL must also be 32 degrees, which is option D. So opposite angles are congruent. Number 33, it says parallelogram WXYZ is a rhombus with the measure of angle ZYE equal to 49 degrees. What is the measure of angle EXW? So you'll notice this is very similar to another problem we did earlier, and we're going to do it the exact same way. So remember your two properties here. The diagonals of a rhombus are perpendicular, which means that at angle E, these are 90-degree angles all the way around. And then you know that the diagonals bisect the opposite angles, which means that at each angle that's split by the diagonal, these are congruent, okay? So again, if I find this angle here, I can find what X is because they're the same. So you'll see that this angle is in a triangle with the 90-degree angle and the 49-degree angle. So to find our missing angle, we take 180 minus 49 minus 90, which is 180 minus 139, which is 41 degrees. So since these angles bisect, that's 41 degrees as well, which is answer choice A. All right, last page, last 4 problems. Number 34, in the given diagram, what is the measure of angle CFE of parallelogram CDEF? So we're looking for CFE, so we're looking for this angle here. So here we have a 34-degree angle, and we see that it has to form this right triangle here. Well, again, we know that this must also be a corner because it completes the rectangle. So the whole thing is 90 and this part is 34. So this part of angle D is 90 minus 34, which is 56, excuse me. And now if we cover that up, we know this angle is 56, and we know we want to determine whether X is opposite or consecutive. Well, X is opposite from the 56-degree angle, which means they're congruent, which means that A is our answer. And again, if you were looking for C or E, you would be doing your consecutive angles because they would be supplementary. Number 35, what is the measure of angle C in quadrilateral ABCD? The key thing about any quadrilateral is that all 4 of the angles add up to 360 degrees. So that means that the measure of angle A plus B plus C plus D is 360. So to find the measure of angle C, you take 360 and subtract 124, 96, and 94. And if we do that, I'm just going to make sure of it. 360 minus 124 minus 96 minus 94. You get 46 degrees for your missing angle C. Okay. Number 36, it says if ABCD is a parallelogram and x equals 5, what is the measure of angle D? Now, since x is equal to 5 and we have x's here, we can go and plug those in. So 4x would be 4 times 5, which would be 20 degrees. And then here we would have 8 times 5, which is 40 degrees. Now, in order to find angle D, we could find angle B. Okay. Now notice here that the diagonal splits this parallelogram up into two congruent triangles. Okay. So in this triangle, we already know that this angle's 20 and this angle's 40. So to find angle B, we know they add up to 180. So angle B would equal 180 minus 20 minus 40, which would be 120 degrees. Now, since we know the measure of angle B, we know that angle D and angle B are opposite angles. So angle D is congruent to angle B, which means the measure of angle D is also 120 degrees. And then our last one, this is a sort of challenge problem of sorts, but it is seen frequently on some standardized tests. So the figure represents the pattern for a quilt. It says the measure of angle ABC is 120. The measure of angle ADC is 2x plus 30. And the measure of angle BCD is x. And it wants us to find the measure of angle DCE. So it wants us to find this angle here. So the first thing is we need to find x. Well, if we cover all that other stuff up, we can see that this shape here, this kite here, is a quadrilateral, and all three of those angles have to add up to 360 degrees. So we take 120 plus 90 plus 2x plus 30 plus x and set it equal to 360. Now on the left side, we combine like terms. So 2x plus x is 3x. 120 plus 90 is 210, plus 30 is 240. We subtract 240 from both sides, and we get that 3x is equal to 120. Divide both sides by 3, and we get that x is equal to 40. Now, we know that this angle now is 40 degrees. Well, since that's 40 degrees, we see that angle DCE and angle BCD form a linear pair. So we know that if we add those two together, we get 180 degrees. So that means the measure of angle DCE is equal to 180 minus 40, which is 140 degrees. Okay. And that's going to do it for this video, guys. I hope this video helped as you work on your quiz and everything else and review for the quiz. I know it said test review at the top, but don't worry about that. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Make sure that you understand all the material and, have the best chance for succeeding on that quiz, okay? Quiz is 20 questions. The first 10 are property based and the last 10 are problems that have been worked out, like the ones that have been worked out here. Okay. I can't guarantee all of them will be on there, obviously, because I put a lot of problems on here. We've been working on this several days. So yeah, if you have any other questions, we're always here to help you. And thanks guys, and I'll see you in the next video.